Live from Blenheim Palace, this is BBC News. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosts nearly 50 European leaders promising a reset of relations in the birthplace of Winston Churchill.
We will strengthen our existing relationships and we will build new ones. This includes resetting our relationship with the EU.
Bravery made Churchill. Bravery won the greatest battle of his life. It was the battle for Britain and, of course, for all Europe.
And I'm Kasia Madera in London with our other main headlines. Joe Biden pauses his election campaign after catching COVID as more Democrats reportedly tell him to drop out. And Donald Trump's running mate, JD Vance, vows to fight for forgotten Americans as he takes centre stage at the Republican Party convention.
I stand here humbled, and I'm overwhelmed with gratitude to say I officially accept your nomination to be Vice President of the United States of America.
Hello, welcome to Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire in England. It's a day for sun cream and diplomacy. This is the location for a summit of nearly 50 European leaders. The name of this summit is the European Political Community, as it says on the big sign. It's a relatively new one, a couple of years old, birthed out of the aftermath of the war in Ukraine, a place for leaders outside the EU and inside the EU to come and talk about matters like security and, of course, Ukraine top of the agenda too. Won't be the only thing that the leaders will be talking about right now inside, things like illegal migration. So that's it from me for the moment here at Blenheim Palace. Plenty more coming up. We'll be hearing from Keir Starmer in a few hours' time. We'll bring you all the coverage of that. For the moment, though, it's back to you in London. Kasia.
Lewis, thank you very much. Lewis Vaughan Jones there at Blenheim Palace. As James Landale there, Lewis's guest, was saying, one person isn't there. Ursula von der Leyen is, of course, in Strasbourg because as we speak, voting for the European Commission President is underway. It's a secret ballot. Members of the European Parliament are deciding whether to give a second term to Ursula von der Leyen as head of the Commission. So stay with us here around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. US Republican convention. JD Vance, the candidate for vice president, has delivered his acceptance address. He began by paying tribute to Donald Trump and urged delegates to follow his lead and fight for America. Mr. Vance said that Republicans were united to try to win back the White House, but not afraid to debate. JD Vance has aligned himself closely with the policies of Mr. Trump, and if the pair win in November, he's seen as the potential future of the Republican Party. As the world monitors what is happening in Washington, no doubt all of those European leaders in Blenheim in the UK will be watching with a lot of interest what is coming from the Republican National Congress and also the health of President Biden as they meet for this conference in the UK to discuss Ukraine and immigration amongst many topics. Welcome, you're watching BBC News. I'm Kasia Madera. Our main headlines. The European Parliament is voting on whether to give Ursula von der Leyen a second term as its Commission President.
I will never accept that demagogues and extremists destroy our European way of life. And I stand here today ready to lead the fight with all the democratic forces in this House.
The British Prime Minister promises to reset relations with the EU as he welcomes dozens of leaders to a major European summit. A lifestyle magazine faces criticism for hiring an AI journalist. Hello, welcome. I'm Kasia Madera. The UK COVID inquiry has found that the government and civil service failed their citizens because of significant flaws in their pandemic preparations. The first report published by the inquiry said that a major flaw was the lack of a system that could be scaled up to test, trace and isolate people. Well, here's Baroness Hallett, the chair of the inquiry, who's just presented her findings. OK, well, Akbar Hussain, thank you very much for just bringing us up to date, joining us live from Dhaka. Thank you so much, and we'll continue to monitor those protests across Bangladesh, around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called for Europe to stay united in support of Kyiv. Well, as we've seen already, he is attending the summit in Britain with leaders from around the continent. The UK's new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, opened the summit a little earlier. Emily, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. Emily Brown there, thank you. Lots more on our website. I'm back in just a few minutes' time, so please do not go away. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Live from Blenheim Palace, this is BBC News. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosts nearly 50 European leaders here at the home of Winston Churchill.
We will strengthen our existing relationships and we will build new ones.
Bravery made Churchill Churchill. Bravery won the greatest battle of his life. It was the battle for Britain and, of course, for all Europe.
And I'm Kasia Madera in London with our other headlines. The European Parliament votes on whether to give Ursula von der Leyen a second term as its Commission President.
I will never accept that demagogues and extremists destroy our European way of life. And I stand here today ready to lead the fight with all the democratic forces in this House.
Joe Biden pauses his election campaign after catching COVID as more Democrats reportedly tell him to drop out. And Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, vows to fight for forgotten Americans as he takes center stage at the Republican Party convention.
I stand here humbled, and I'm overwhelmed with gratitude to say I officially accept your nomination to be Vice President of the United States of America.
Hello, welcome to Blenheim Palace here in Oxfordshire in England. I'm Vaughan Jones. This is the backdrop, the location for a summit of European leaders, nearly 50 or so, all hosted this time by Sir Keir Starmer, the new UK Prime Minister, Labour Party in charge. The Conservatives were just 2 weeks or so ago. Now it's the Labour Party and Keir Starmer here saying this is a chance for a reset. That is a key word that will be repeated throughout the day here. A reset in those relations between the UK and the EU and also the wider European family, other European leaders. Because remember, half the leaders here, roughly, are from Sir Keir Starmer in a press conference. We'll bring you all of that, of course. For now, though, I'll hand you back to London.
What a fascinating little bit of history. What an insight. Lewis, thank you so much. Lewis Vaughan Jones there at Blenheim with James Landau. Brilliant little quirk of history. James Landau there mentioning that Ursula von der Leyen is not there. She's not in the UK, and that's because she is in Strasbourg, where voting for the European Commission President is underway right now. OK, well, Maria de Metzis, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, which is a Brussels-based economic think tank. Really good to get you in that moment, just as we had confirmation that Ursula von der Leyen has been voted in for a second term as the European Commission President. Lots more reaction coming up, lots more on our website as well. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. A Russian court has sentenced the US citizen Michael Travis Leak to 13 years in prison on drug smuggling charges. The court service said that the musician and former paratrooper was found guilty of selling drugs on a large scale. Now, this comes as a second hearing was held behind closed doors in the espionage trial of the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Yes, of course, because yes, important to remember that he died a hero, as his family have said. Neda Tawfiq there from the Republican National Convention Center in Milwaukee. Of course, lots more on our website. Don't go away. I'll be back in just a few minutes' time. Welcome, this is BBC News. I'm Kasia Madera. Our main headlines. The European Parliament has re-elected Ursula von der Leyen for a second term as Commission President. The British Prime Minister promises to reset relations with the EU as he welcomes dozens of leaders to a major summit. The UK COVID inquiry has delivered a damning first report, finding that the government planned for the wrong pandemic.
The UK prepared for the wrong pandemic.
And a lifestyle magazine faces criticism for hiring an AI journalist. Hello, welcome back. I'm Kasia Madera. The UK COVID inquiry has found that the government and civil service failed their citizens because of significant flaws in their pandemic preparations. The first report published by the inquiry said that meant COVID caused more deaths and economic damage than it should have. One major flaw was the lack of a system that could be scaled up to test, trace and isolate people. Well, here's Baroness Hallett, chair of the inquiry, presenting her findings. My thanks to my guests, Orysia Lutsevich from Chatham House and also Gustav Gressel from the European Council on Foreign Relations, speaking to me off the back of that meeting at Blenheim House. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Let's turn to Bangladesh now, where officials say that at least 12 people have died today in protests against discriminatory job quotas. Authorities deployed thousands of soldiers across the country to restore order after days of deadly protests. They have announced a nationwide shutdown of mobile internet services. Well, demonstrations first broke out on university campuses 2 weeks ago, and students are pushing for a nationwide shutdown. The protesters have been pressing for an end to the quota system for government jobs. The job market in Bangladesh is already extremely tough amid high unemployment, heavy inflation and a struggling economy. Well, Akbar Hussain is our reporter in Dhaka, and he told us more about these protests. Akbar Hussain joining me from Dhaka. Now, just time to tell you that conservationists in Cambodia say that 60 baby Siamese crocodiles were born at the end of June, and this is a hatching record for this critically endangered species. They've called the hatchings a real sign of hope after more than 20 years of efforts to revive the reptiles' numbers in the remote Cardamom Mountains. These crocodiles were once widespread throughout Southeast Asia, but decades of hunting and habitat loss have turned them into a critically endangered species. So some good news. Bye-bye.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK COVID inquiry publishes a first damning report saying the government failed its citizens by planning for the wrong pandemic.
In reality, the UK was ill prepared for dealing with the whole system civil emergency of a pandemic, let alone the coronavirus pandemic that actually struck.
I'm Kasia Madera with our other main headlines. The British Prime Minister promises to reset relations with the EU as he welcomes dozens of leaders to a major summit at the palace where Sir Winston Churchill was born.
We will strengthen our existing relationships and we will build new ones. This includes resetting our relationship with the EU.
Bravery made Churchill. Bravery won the greatest battle of his life. It was the battle for Britain and, of course, for all Europe.
The European Parliament re-elects Ursula von der Leyen for another 5 years as Commission President.
Hello, I'm Nicky Schiller, live at the COVID inquiry here in London, where within the last couple of hours, the inquiry has published its first report into the pandemic. Now, this report was looking at how prepared the United Kingdom was for the COVID pandemic that, of course, struck around the world in 2020. The report is over 200 pages long and it doesn't pull punches. It is damning in the way it looks at how the UK was planning for the pandemic. Baroness Hallett, the inquiry chair, said that the government failed its citizens on COVID by planning for the wrong pandemic. She says more people died due to significant planning flaws by the UK government and the devolved nations. She has made 10 recommendations, as she says, to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. They are wide-ranging and it is now for the government to decide whether they implement those changes. Our first report is from our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
You're watching BBC News. President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged his allies to allow Ukraine to use Western weapons for long-range strikes on Russia, particularly on military airfields. He was speaking at a major summit of around 50 European leaders at Blenheim Palace here in the UK. Now, one major player who isn't there is the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who has just been re-elected by the EU Parliament. We'll bring you much more on that in just a moment. But first, Vaughan Jones is at the summit for us. So that was Maria de Mertzis from the Bruegel, Brussels-based economic think tank, speaking to me just after Ursula von der Leyen was re-elected. And just to bring you a line, she has been speaking and she has saying that our democracy is under attack, but we are all working together for a strong Europe. Well, she's got another 5 years now in which to achieve that. From me and the team here on BBC News. Bye-bye.
Live from the New York Stock Exchange, now on BBC News Business Today. Opening bell.
China's Communist Party's 4-day meeting ends without any clear solutions to the country's economic woes. And leading semiconductor manufacturer TSMC reports a 36% jump in second quarter net profits, beating estimates. Hello there, welcome to Business Today with me, Marc Ashdown. Let's start in China, and an important meeting of the Communist Party has concluded in Beijing with no clear indication of how Chinese leaders aim to solve the country's economic problems. The world's second largest economy is struggling with high levels of local government debt and a depressed real estate market. The 4-day meeting, which is known as the Plenum, is held once every 5 years and lays out the country's future economic direction. Well, let's bring in Leah Fahy, who's a China economist with Capital Economics. Thanks very much for being with us. This has been built up really as, especially by the state media, as that opportunity to set those clear targets, but nothing really specific here, is there? OK, Carsten, thanks very much indeed, as ever. Carsten Brzezicki there, who's Global Head of Macro for ING Research on that ECB rate decision. Right, let's look at some other business news now. Shares of Beyond Meat slumped some 13% in after-hours trading after the Wall Street Journal reported the firm is in restructuring talks with bondholders. Beyond Meat, of course, supplies plant-based meat burgers, sausages, ground beef, that sort of thing, to chains including McDonald's, as well as selling direct to consumers. But it has been burning through cash because of weaker demand. Italy's competition watchdog has launched an investigation into Google and its parent company Alphabet over suspected unfair practices involving users' personal data. The antitrust agency is scrutinising Google's consent requests. Those are the bits that seek permission to use data across services like Google Search, Maps and YouTube. The watchdog says those requests lack clear information on how that data will be used. And Saudi Group has signed a deal with Germany-based air taxi developer Lilium to purchase 100 all-electric flying shuttles. The Saudi state-owned airline made a firm order for 50 of Lilium's electric vertical takeoff and landing jets, with an option for an additional 50, Lilium said. The first aircraft are expected to join Saudi's fleet in 2026. That's all the business news for me. Stay with us on BBC News.
Hello from the BBC Sports Centre, I'm Tanya Arnold. The 152nd Open Championship, the final men's major of the season, is underway at Royal Troon on the west coast of Scotland. The defending champion, Brian Harman, is among those out on the course. Ben Croucher is there for us. And Ben, difficult conditions, which is causing problems for some of the golfers, isn't it? That is all your sport for now, Kasia.
Oh my goodness, they're getting younger and younger. Tanya, thank you so much. I'm Kasia Madera and we are going to keep up with the sporting theme because it is just over a week till the Paris Olympics get underway, and a team at BBC Sport have embarked on a 500-mile bike ride from Manchester to Paris. Well, the team of cyclists are currently riding from Loughborough to Milton Keynes, and they should arrive in Paris just in time for the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games next Friday. BBC Sports Sarah Dawkins sent us this update. Our thanks to Emily Brown. That is it from me. Matthew is here in just a moment, so do stay with us here on BBC News. Bye-bye.
Hello, it's time for us to take a look at the latest weather around the world.